At 5:41 in the morning, 5 fast-moving contacts appeared inside the outer defensive screen of a United States carrier strike group. They were already too close. 18 nautical miles east of the aircraft carrier, the first 2 radar tracks emerged from the surface clutter almost simultaneously. 3 seconds later, another contact appeared to the south. Then 2 more materialized behind the formation, where the carrier's wake stretched across the dark water. Inside the Combat Information Center of the lead destroyer, the surface warfare coordinator leaned toward the tactical display. 5 unknown contacts, speed 24 knots, no identification. The tracks were immediately designated surface contacts 701 through 705. At first, they looked like ordinary small craft. Low profiles, weak radar returns, irregular movement caused by the early morning waves. But ordinary vessels did not approach a carrier strike group from 5 separate directions. They did not operate without identification signals, and they did not accelerate together. At 5:42, all 5 contacts increased speed. 24 knots became 32, then 38. Within 90 seconds, the lead boat was racing across the water at more than 40 knots, throwing a long white wake behind its stern. On the carrier's deck, flight operations were already underway. Yellow shirt directors were positioning fighter jets near the catapults. Ordnance crews worked around armed aircraft, while fuel lines, tow tractors, and deck equipment filled the narrow spaces between parked planes. A single explosion on that deck could ignite fuel, ammunition, and aircraft packed within feet of one another. There is a particular kind of dread that comes from watching a crowded, flammable space and realizing the danger isn't inside it yet. It's approaching from outside, and you can't seal the door. The carrier could not allow any unidentified boat to get close. Long-range cameras aboard the destroyer rotated toward the contacts. The first images arrived through heat distortion and morning haze. 5 narrow-hulled, fast attack boats, each carrying several men with equipment mounted behind the forward cabin. No fishing nets, no commercial markings, no navigation lights. The tactical action officer ordered the first warning transmitted on the International Maritime Frequency. Unidentified vessels approaching the United States Naval formation. Alter course immediately. Maintain a safe distance. The message repeated. No response. It went out again in Persian. Still nothing. At 5:43, the boat's formation began to change. 2 vessels moved toward the carrier's port side. 2 others widened their spacing and dropped behind the American formation. The 5th continued straight toward the carrier's bow. They were no longer independent contacts. They were forming an attack geometry. The officer of the deck watched bearing reports arrive every few seconds. The ship held course, but additional lookouts were sent topside, and damage control teams were placed on immediate standby. Across the strike group, sailors moved to their stations without shouting or confusion, the kind of quiet discipline that only comes from having rehearsed the worst day over and over, until it stops feeling unimaginable. The escorts had trained for this. The carrier had trained for this, but training could not tell them what the Iranian crews actually intended. Harassment run, intelligence gathering, a hidden payload, or a diversion meant to pull one escort out of position so another boat could strike from a different angle. It's the kind of uncertainty that would keep anyone up at night, not knowing which of 4 bad possibilities you're actually facing until it's already happening. At 5:44, the destroyer's electronic warfare suite picked up a short transmission from the southernmost boat. It lasted less than 4 seconds, narrow, directional, aimed at the American formation. Then it vanished. Possible data burst, the electronic warfare officer reported. Sources contact 703. There was no way to confirm what had been sent. It was already gone. 30 seconds later, 703 accelerated again, climbing past 45 knots. On camera, 3 men moved across its deck. One stayed at the wheel, another crouched near the bow. A third pulled a dark cover off a long object mounted behind the cabin. The picture was shaky, but the shape was unmistakable. The launch cycle on the flight deck was suspended. Aircraft near the catapults stayed in place, but nothing was cleared to take off. Fuel crews disconnected hoses. Ordnance teams cleared exposed areas. 2 alert fighters were readied for an emergency launch. The escorting destroyers began to maneuver, one shifting toward the carrier's port quarter, the other increasing speed and sliding behind the formation to close the gap. The carrier stayed at the center, protected, but never still. At 5:47, another warning went out. Iranian vessels, your course and speed are unsafe. Reduce speed and turn away immediately. No reply. The 5 boats kept closing, 14 nautical miles, 13, 12 and a half, their wakes widening as the engines pushed harder. At 5:48, the lead boat turned broadside for 6 seconds. The long-range camera caught the object on its aft deck, rising above the cabin roof. 2 crewmen positioned beside it. At the same moment, the destroyer's electronic warfare system detected a focused pulse aimed at the carrier jom. Stronger, more precise, consistent with targeting activity. Possible hostile targeting, the tactical action officer said. Recommend immediate defensive posture. Weapons crews took control of their mounts. Fire control systems began tracking individual boats. The carrier increased speed. Both destroyers tightened around it. Then, at exactly 5:49, all 5 boats accelerated together. The range fell below 12 nautical miles. They were no longer approaching. They were beginning their attack run. The 5 boats split into 3 groups. Contacts 701 and 702 moved toward the carrier's port side, staying less than half a nautical mile apart. 703 ran straight at the lead destroyer. The last 2 widened behind the formation near the carrier's stern, forcing the strike group to watch every direction at once. 703 was now doing 48 knots. Closest point of approach, 1.8 nautical miles. Time to that point, 5 minutes. The destroyer surged ahead and cut across the boat's projected path, putting thousands of tons of American steel between the Iranian vessel and the carrier. Its 5-inch gun rotated toward the contact and stayed elevated. No round loaded yet. The gesture alone carried the warning. At 5:50, the formation transmitted again. Iranian vessels, your actions are threatening. Reduce speed and alter course immediately. For the first time, a voice answered. United States warship, leave the area, 3 seconds. Then silence. No identification offered. No explanation for the formation. No sign of slowing down. A final warning followed. Maintain a safe distance. Continued approach may result in defensive action. Nothing came back. On the flight deck, the 2 alert fighters were now fully manned, engines turning as ground crews pulled the last safety pins. The jets could be airborne within minutes, but launching them meant the carrier had to hold a precise course into the wind. Exactly the kind of predictable exposed posture the Iranian boats seemed to be trying to force. At 5:51, 703 turned directly toward the destroyer's starboard bow, its passing distance falling below 1 nautical mile. The bridge crew could see it now without magnification, a low gray hull rising and falling through the waves, spray thrown high behind it, men visible near the forward gun. The destroyer sounded 5 short blasts, the international danger signal rolling across the water. The boat didn't turn. The captain ordered a controlled turn to port, swinging the destroyer's bow across the boat's path, a physical barrier without abandoning position. For several seconds, 703 looked committed to collision. Then it broke away sharply. It hadn't been trying to ram. It had been a diversion. While the bridge tracked the near miss, 701 and 702 surged through the gap opening on the carrier's port side, speed climbing past 50 knots. They're pulling the escort away from the carrier, the surface warfare coordinator said. The destroyer broke off its turn, returned to the carrier, and restored the screen. The second escort shifted forward to close the gap from the other side. The maneuver hadn't split the formation, but it had bought the boat's ground. 701 was now just 8 nautical miles out. At 5:53, a helicopter lifted off the trailing destroyer's deck, rotor wash driving spray outward in a white ring. It climbed to 300 feet, banked left, and accelerated toward the boats. Its camera locked onto 701, at least 6 men aboard, a heavy machine gun near the bow. Behind the cabin, 2 long cylindrical objects secured to angled rails. One crewman pulled the cover off the nearest tube, another moved to a control panel beside it. The helicopter broadcast a warning. Iranian vessel, this is a United States Navy helicopter. Reduce speed and turn away immediately. 701 held course. The aircraft dropped to 200 feet and shifted to the boat's port side, staying outside effective small arms range while keeping the camera locked on the deck. The crew looked up. One man moved behind the forward gun, which began rotating toward the aircraft. The helicopter climbed immediately and widened its orbit. At 5:54, 702 cut behind the lead boat and swung farther west, forcing the Americans to split their attention across two threat axes at once. Every course change bought the boats another few seconds. At 5:55, the helicopter's sensor operator caught movement behind 701's cabin, a crewman raising one of the launch rails to a shallow angle above the horizon. At the same instant, the destroyer detected a new, stronger radar signal from Contact 704, one of the trailing boats. It swept across the formation once, then locked into a narrow beam. Possible fire control radar, the electronic warfare officer reported. Before anyone could respond, a bright flash lit up behind 701. A column of white smoke erupted from its stern. Something separated from the boat and accelerated low over the water. The destroyer's radar picked it up 2 seconds later. Vampire inbound, bearing 087, all stations, weapons free. The missile was less than 6 miles out, flying below 100 feet, fast enough to close the distance in under 40 seconds. At that altitude, it kept vanishing into the surface clutter as the waves scattered the radar returns. For 3 seconds, the track disappeared entirely. Then the Aegis system found it again. Vampire confirmed, bearing 087, speed 400 knots, inbound to the carrier. The lead destroyer took the shot, fusing radar data from itself, the second escort, the carrier, and the helicopter circling above the boats into a single continuous track. At 56 minutes and 12 seconds, an interceptor erupted from the forward launch cells and a column of flame climbed sharply, rolled east, and dove toward the sea-skimming target. The missile kept coming, 20 seconds to impact. The interceptor's radar found it above the water. 8 seconds later, a white flash lit the horizon. The track disappeared from every display. Vampire destroyed, nobody celebrated. The missile was down. The boats weren't. 701 and 702 were now inside 7 nautical miles. 703 had reversed course, heading back toward the lead destroyer. 704 and 705 kept transmitting short bursts. The first missile hadn't been the real attack. It had bought the boat seconds while the American ships looked outward. At 5:57, the helicopter moved back over 701, camera fixed on the still elevated launcher, the second tube still covered. The forward guns swung toward the aircraft. A burst of fire flashed from the bow. Rounds passed under the helicopter and struck the water in a broken line. The pilot pulled up and banked away. Aircraft receiving fire. Ashkol, contact 701 is hostile, the commander reported. The classification changed instantly. These were no longer unidentified vessels. They were active threats. At 5:58, 703 turned toward the lead destroyer at more than 40 knots, its projected path crossing the ship's bow at under 800 yards. Alter course immediately or you will be fired upon. It held speed. The destroyer fired warning shots into the water ahead of it, tall columns of spray rising across its path. The boat drove straight through them without slowing. Engage propulsion only, the captain ordered. A remote gun mount tracked the stern. The first burst hit behind the cabin. The second tore across the engine compartment. Black smoke poured from the rear. Speed dropped from 43 knots to 20, then 12. The hull swung broadside and slid across the water, trailing fuel and white wake. The destroyer ceased fire. 1 threat down, 4 to go. At the same moment, 702 cut behind the disabled boat and surged toward the carrier's port side, using the smoke to blind the lead destroyer's optical sensors. Radar still held the track, but the carrier now had less than 4 nautical miles of separation. Contact 702, range 3.8, speed 51 knots, the surface warfare coordinator reported. The carrier increased speed and began a controlled turn to starboard, its enormous hull responding slowly, bow carving a wide arc across the water. On the flight deck, parked aircraft shifted against their restraints as sailors crouched and secured anything loose. The second destroyer cut across 702's approach. The boat turned inside the maneuver and kept coming. 3 nautical miles, 2.7. Through the camera, operators could see a crewman behind the forward weapon and another working the second launch tube, which began to rise. At 6 o'clock, the helicopter came back around from the opposite side and confirmed the launcher was moving. A possible second weapons preparing to fire. The carrier's portside gun crews got the designation. The destroyer's fire control locked onto the boat's engines and forward mount. One more warning went out. No answer. The bow gun swung toward the carrier. Engage hostile surface contact. A controlled burst crossed the water. Rounds struck the forward mount, throwing fragments into the sea. A second burst hit the stern. One engine died instantly, forcing the damaged boat into a tightening circle. The other engine kept pushing, unbalanced. Smoke rose from the cabin. The launcher stayed up but never fired. At 6:01, 702 lost speed and stopped less than 2 miles from the carrier. 2 boats neutralized just, but the electronic warfare console was filling with new signals. 704 and 705, still outside gun range behind the formation, had activated their radars almost simultaneously. One beamed toward the carrier, the other transmitted outward toward something beyond the horizon. Then the destroyer's radar picked up 2 new airborne contacts, both low, both accelerating, both closing from different directions. The first missile hadn't been the main attack, it had only opened the door. The 2 inbound weapons came from opposite sides of the formation, one northeast, heading for the lead destroyer, the other behind the strike group, less than 5 miles from the carrier's stern, both low enough to hide in the wave tops. At 6:02, Aegis assigned each to a different ship. There was no time to wait for a cleaner picture. The forward destroyer launched first an interceptor, climbing off the deck, turning toward the faster, more distant northern threat. The trailing destroyer brought its close-in defenses online for the second one. Rear contact, range 4.2 nautical miles, time to impact 31 seconds. For 2 radar sweeps, there was nothing. Then the target reappeared under 50 feet above the water. The close-in gun locked on and began spinning up before the missile even reached visual range. At 6:03, the northern interceptor met the first weapon beyond the formation. A flash opened above the horizon. The track broke apart and fell into the sea. 1 target left. 20 seconds. It drifted slightly to port, correcting toward the carrier's turn. Jamming signals swept across its likely seeker frequencies, but it held course. 14 seconds to impact, the close-in cannon opened fire, a continuous stream of rounds cutting across its projected path. The first burst didn't stop it. The system corrected. A second burst struck the missile less than a mile out, breaking its return into fragments that fell behind the destroyer into the carrier's wake. Second Vampire destroyed. 3 airborne weapons stopped in under 7 minutes, but the surface fight had shifted. 704 and 705 broke off and ran west. 701, the boat that had fired the first missile and shot at the helicopter, was still inside 6 nautical miles, still armed, still maneuvering, now hiding behind its own smoke. At 6:04, the carrier got clearance to launch and completed its turn into the wind. Catapult crews moved into position. Steam rolled across the deck. The first fighter's engines came up to full power, and seconds later, the catapult fired, flinging it from 0 to flying speed across the deck and into the morning sky. The second launched less than a minute behind it, one climbing above 10,000 feet to extend the strike group's sensor reach, the other staying low, turning toward the boats and the circling helicopter. The Americans weren't just defending the center of the formation anymore. They were over every surviving contact. At 6:06, 701 broke out of its own smoke, turned southeast, still doing better than 35 knots. The second launcher still raised. Lower your weapon and stop immediately. No answer. The low fighter passed a few thousand feet to its east, close enough to be seen and heard, far enough not to provoke a wild reaction. The boat kept moving, its launcher swinging toward the formation. The lead destroyer took the updated coordinates from the helicopter and targeted the boat's propulsion and its weapon mount. The captain authorized the engagement. The first burst hit the launcher assembly, knocking the tube sideways onto the deck. The second hit the stern near the engines. 701 lost power almost at once, its wake shrinking as it slowed, turned across the waves, and stopped. By 6:08, 3 of the 5 boats could no longer fight. 703 and 702 disabled near the carrier's port side. 701 dead in the water farther east. 704 withdrawing under watch from the high fighter. 705 gone into a spreading smokescreen to the west. The Americans didn't chase blindly. The destroyers held close to the carrier. The helicopter worked outward, its infrared sensor probing the smoke. The second fighter tracked every moving vessel and fed the full picture back to the formation. At 6:10, they found 705 the Orange racing west at 46 knots, a long object still fixed behind its cabin, looking like it was leaving. And then it turned hard, bow swinging back toward the trailing destroyer. The distance fell fast. 3 nautical miles, then 2.7. It accelerated again, its forward weapon rotating toward the warship, one more targeting pulse. This is your final warning. Turn away immediately. It didn't. The captain watched the range drop below 2.5 miles. If that vessel maintains course, he said neutralize it. 705 was doing 48 knots, close enough to cross the remaining distance in 3 minutes, its bow slamming into the water as the crew ran the engines flat out. The destroyer held its position between the boat and the carrier. Another warning went out. Turn away, disengage your weapon, reduce speed, nothing. Through the camera, 4 men were visible, 1 at the controls, 2 around the forward gun, a 4th behind the cabin near the long tube on the deck. The forward weapon kept turning toward the ship. Closest point of approach, 0.3 nautical miles. At that speed, it would cross the destroyer's bow at under 600 yards. And if it turned even slightly, it could hit the ship outright. Engage, stop the vessel. At 6:12, the first burst crossed the water and struck the gun mount and the deck around it. The weapon stopped turning, the 2 men near it scattered as fragments sprayed across the bow. Still, the boat didn't slow. Fire shifted to the propulsion section. A second burst hit behind the cabin. Black smoke erupted from the stern. 1 engine failed, forcing a sharp turn. The other kept pushing without balance. 705 swung across the destroyer's bow, missed the collision point, and began circling to port. The destroyer ceased fire. Speed fell below 10 knots, then 5. At 6:13, it stopped less than a mile from the American warship. The final attack had failed. Overhead, both fighters stayed up, one scanning beyond the horizon for anything else in the air, the other circling low over the 5 boats to confirm nothing was still armed and moving. The helicopter eased down towards 705, its infrared picking up heat around the damaged engine and gun, but no sign of another launch being readied. Several crewmen had stepped away from the weapons and gathered near the center of the deck. Iranian crew, remain visible. Do not approach any weapon, the helicopter transmitted. This time, they complied. One by one, the rest of the picture came into focus. 701 motionless east of the carrier, launcher wrecked, engines dead. 702 drifting near the carrier's old track, smoke still rising. 703 without propulsion after the first engagement. 704 still pulling away west, tracked continuously by the high fighter, no longer transmitting or maneuvering toward the group. 705 dead in the water. At 6:15, the electronic warfare officer reported all hostile targeting signals had stopped. The strike group didn't relax. The forward destroyer widened its search for other contacts. The trailing destroyer kept weapons trained on the disabled boats. The helicopter stayed outside small arms range, recording every movement on their decks. No boarding team went out. The boats could still be carrying explosives. The damaged launchers could still hold live weapons, and getting too close too fast could hand the attackers a second chance. The carrier kept moving. It never stopped. By 6:17, the flight deck was back to normal operations. Sailors repositioned aircraft that had been lashed down during the engagement. Catapult crews inspected their gear. Ordnance teams confirmed no fragments had reached the ship. No damage to the carrier. Neither destroyer had been hit. The helicopter was still flying, both fighters were still fully operational. 5 boats had attacked from 5 directions. 3 missiles had been launched and destroyed. Gunfire had been aimed at an American aircraft. 2 boats had tried to breach the carrier's inner screen. None of them made it. By 6:20, the formation had tightened back into its defensive pattern. 1 destroyer ahead of the carrier, 1 behind, the helicopter and the fighters holding overlapping watch above. Inside the Combat Information Center, the whole engagement got pieced back together from the radar tracks and sensor logs. 703 had pulled the lead destroyer out of position. 701 and 702 had used that opening to close on the carrier. 704 and 705 had stayed outside the formation, feeding targeting data and launching the second wave. It was a plan built on making every American ship fight its own separate battle. That was the miscalculation. The destroyers, the aircraft, the helicopter, and the carrier had all been working off one shared picture the entire time. Anything one sensor caught, every other platform saw within seconds. No escort chased past its lane. No gap in the defense stayed open more than a few heartbeats. 5 boats had come at 5 points in the formation. The Americans had answered as a single connected force, and it's hard not to wonder, watching it laid out afterward, whether the outcome would have looked any different if just one of those 5 boats had gotten one radar sweep luckier. At 6:24, the sun came up over the horizon. The carrier held speed, a broad white wake trailing behind it, escorts holding position on either side, the 2 fighters crossing low over the flight deck before turning back to their patrol stations. Behind the formation, 3 of the Iranian boats sat motionless. A 4th was still pulling away under watch. The 5th drifted beside a widening slick of dark water, engine silent, weapon disabled. The whole engagement had lasted less than 45 minutes. 5 fast boats had come at a carrier strike group believing that speed, surprise, and coming from every direction at once could overwhelm it. What they found instead was a formation that had never really been fighting as separate ships at all, and a response that, in hindsight, had started building the moment the first radar contact blinked onto the screen, long before anyone fired a shot.